She called me a stepping stone. 72 hours later, she lost everything. There is a smell that bakes into your skin when you spend 80 hours a week working under the chassis of commercial diesel trucks. It is not something you can just wash away with a quick 5-minute shower or a cheap bar of Irish Spring soap. You can stand at the heavy, cast-iron porcelain sink in the back of the shop, scrubbing your hands with heavy-duty pumice soap and a stiff nylon brush until the skin over your knuckles is raw, split, and bleeding. You can go home and stand under scalding hot water until your back turns a bright, angry red and your muscles turn to jelly, but the deep, metallic, suffocating scent of 15W, 40 motor oil, burnt transmission fluid, and diesel exhaust stays inside your pores. It settles deep into the microscopic cracks of your hands and the creases of your neck. It becomes a permanent, unavoidable part of your DNA, a silent, lingering testament to exactly how you trade your physical body, day by day, for a printed paycheck. I carried that smell on me for 7 straight years in Dayton, Ohio. I carried it to the grocery store aisle on Tuesday nights while buying cheap dinners. I carried it into our bed at night, and I carried it so my wife could walk around the pristine, temperature-controlled, brightly lit corridors of a hospital in a perfectly pressed, spotless white coat. Her world smelled like expensive lavender laundry detergent, high-grade clinical antiseptic, and pure, boundless potential. Mine smelled like dirt, labor, and exhaust. 7 years of black grease permanently packed under my fingernails bought her a medical degree. And it took exactly 32 seconds on a Thursday afternoon for her to throw every single bit of it away. I need to lay this out in hard, undeniable numbers, because numbers do not have an agenda, they do not have a fragile ego, and they absolutely do not lie. They are the only things you can trust when the bottom falls out of your life and everything else falls apart. I am 46 years old. My name is Thomas Hannon. I married Claire in 2017. Back then, she was 28 years old, working as a front desk receptionist at a high-volume, soul-crushing dental office on the west side of town. I met her when she brought her beat-up, rusted 2009 Chevy Cobalt into the shop because the alternator was failing and the engine was threatening to seize. She was sitting in the plastic chairs in our waiting area, quietly crying over a repair estimate she couldn't afford. I paid for the parts out of my own pocket and did the labor off the clock. That was how it started. She was undeniably brilliant, sharp-witted, and wildly ambitious, with piercing eyes that looked right through you and focused on a horizon nobody else in that waiting room could see. She had a dream of going to medical school that consumed her every waking thought, a fire in her gut that I admired more than anything I had ever seen. But she also had a credit score of 580 and exactly $42,600 in undergraduate student loan debt that she was completely ignoring because she simply could not afford the minimum monthly payments on a receptionist's meager salary. She was drowning in deep water before she even learned how to swim. I was 37. I owned my own towering, red steel stacks of Snap-on tools free and clear. I had absolutely zero debt to my name. I owned a modest ranch home, and I was the lead diesel mechanic at a massive fleet service center right off Interstate 75. When we got married, we made a deal sitting across from each other at our scratched Formica kitchen table. It was not a romantic, sweeping cinematic moment with tears, candlelight, and sweeping orchestral music. It was a practical, concrete, blood oath kind of vow made over 2 mugs of bitter black coffee. The deal was simple. I would shoulder the brutal, grinding weight of the earth so she could touch the sky. I would pay the mortgage on our small, drafty 2-bedroom house. I would pay the electric bill, the water bill, the groceries, the car insurance, and I would cash flow whatever her new, astronomical student loans did not cover so she would not graduate $500,000 in the hole. I looked her dead in the eye, held her soft hand across that cheap table, and promised her that she would never, ever have to worry about keeping the lights on or putting food in the refrigerator. Her only job in this world was to study, to pass her boards, and to become the doctor she was born to be. For 7 long, grueling years, I worked a schedule that systematically breaks a man down to his bare cartilage and bone. Monday through Saturday, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Sometimes Sundays, too, when a big rig carrying perishable freight was stuck on the side of the highway in the dead of winter and the logistics company needed it moving right that second or they'd lose $50,000 in spoiled goods. I remember a massive, paralyzing blizzard in February of 2019. The wind chill was 14 below zero. The snow was coming down sideways in thick, blinding sheets that felt like crushed glass hitting your face. I spent 6 hours flat on my back in the freezing slush and corrosive road salt on the shoulder of I-70, swapping out a frozen, cracked air brake line on a massive Peterbilt tractor trailer while semis blew past me at 60 miles an hour, shaking the ground. I was completely unable to feel my toes or my fingers for the last 2 hours of the job. When I finally got home at 2 in the morning, practically hypothermic and shaking so violently, I couldn't even get my key into the front door lock for 5 minutes. Claire was fast asleep in her warm bed. Her heavy medical textbooks were highlighted in bright yellow and neatly stacked on her nightstand under a warm, glowing reading lamp. I took a hot shower, wrapped myself in a heavy wool blanket, and sat on the edge of the bed just watching her breathe. I felt a profound, exhausted pride. I was doing that for her. I was taking the brutal physical punishment of the cold, unforgiving world so her brilliant mind could work in absolute peace. I ate cold ham and cheese sandwiches out of a plastic Coleman cooler while sitting on overturned joint compound buckets in the drafty, echoing shop, listening to the pneumatic wrenches scream. I missed Thanksgivings with my own extended family because holiday pay was double time and we desperately needed the cash for her upcoming lab fees and clinical rotations. I missed summer barbecues, birthdays, and weekend fishing trips. I watched the guys I grew up with buy base boats, take their wives to Florida for vacation, and spend their weekends drinking beer on their front porches, while I put every spare dollar, every single hour of time and a half overtime, into a joint checking account. That account drained out like water through a sieve on the first of every single month to pay for her towering stacks of textbooks, her tuition gaps, and her wildly expensive board exam registrations. I paid off her lingering undergraduate debt completely in the fall of 2019. I marched into the local bank branch, pulled from my hard-earned savings, and wrote a cashier's check for $28,000 to clear the balance in one massive, final swing. The look of relief on her face that day was worth every busted knuckle and aching joint. I bought her a reliable, low-mileage Honda CR-V in 2020 so she could drive to her clinical rotations safely in the heavy Ohio snow, paid in cash, with a clean title put solely in her name so she would have an asset of her own. I continued to drive a rusted, dented 2008 Ford Ranger with a failing heater core and a grinding transmission, so she could have heated leather seats and a backup camera. When she finally matched into a highly competitive residency program in family medicine right here in Dayton, we celebrated with a bottle of champagne I bought for $80. It was the most money I had ever spent on a single liquid that you could not pour into a combustion engine. As we drank it out of cheap glass flutes in our kitchen, leaning against the laminate counter, she cried. She held my calloused face in her soft hands and told me she could never have done it without me, that I was her absolute rock, that this was our victory, not just hers. I believed her. I believed every single syllable that came out of her mouth, because you have to believe in the thing you are breaking your back to build. She finished her residency. She survived the sleepless nights, the grueling 36-hour shifts, the brutal, demanding attending physicians, and the endless stacks of patient charts. She was finally a doctor, Dr. Claire Hannon. I framed her medical diploma myself out in my garage, measuring the mat board perfectly, cutting the glass by hand, because custom framing at the local craft store cost $200, and I wanted to save that money for her new professional wardrobe. I hung it in the main hallway of our house, centering it perfectly directly under the overhead light fixture, so it was the absolute first thing you saw when you walked through the front door. The master plan, the beautiful dream we had talked about since that first cup of coffee at the Formica table, was always for her to open her own private practice. That was the ultimate finish line we had been running toward for the better part of a decade. But commercial real estate in a decent, affluent part of town is astronomically expensive. Banks are notoriously hesitant to lend $500,000 for a medical office build-out to a brand-new doctor without substantial collateral, massive cash reserves, or a proven revenue history, no matter how good their medical degree looks on the wall. Claire was incredibly stressed about it. She spent months in late 2024 desperately looking at leasing options, talking to fast-talking, slick commercial brokers in expensive suits, and complaining bitterly at the dinner table about the predatory interest rates and the impossible terms they were demanding. She would pace the living room carpet until midnight, calculating overhead costs on a yellow legal pad, frustrated to tears that the local property management groups wanted 10-year commitments and massive personal financial guarantees that we simply could not provide. Here is the piece of the story she did not know. and it is the heavy steel hinge that everything else in this entire nightmare swings on. In November of 2023, my father passed away. He was a quiet, stoic, deeply honorable man who lived in Akron and worked as a letter carrier for the United States Postal Service his entire adult life. He walked miles every day in the rain, sleet, and snow. He never bought a new car, never took a fancy vacation, and never spent a single dime of money on himself. He was a child of the Depression, raised by people who knew what it meant to truly go hungry, and he saved absolutely everything he earned. He left me a substantial life insurance policy and the entirety of his carefully managed retirement savings, which cleared probate quickly, bypassed the major tax hurdles, and hit my personal bank account to the tune of $485,000. I did not tell Claire about the money. I have been asked by 2 different lawyers since this all happened why I kept an inheritance of that magnitude a secret from my own wife, especially when she was stressing about money. The honest, God's truth answer is that I wanted to give her the absolute world, and I wanted it to be the greatest, most life-changing surprise of her life. I wanted to hand her the keys to her kingdom. I knew she was desperately looking for a clinic space and hitting brick walls at every turn. I spent my rare days off driving around the upscale neighborhoods of Dayton and the surrounding wealthy suburbs, looking for sale signs on commercial lots while she was at the hospital. I found a standalone, beautiful red brick building in the Oakwood district that used to be a high-end accounting firm. It was perfect in every single conceivable way. It had 3 large, spacious rooms that could easily be converted into state-of-the-art exam rooms, a beautiful, sunlit waiting area with vaulted ceilings and exposed wooden beams, a private corner office in the back with large windows looking out at a line of oak trees, and its own freshly paved private parking lot. The asking price was $410,000. I hired a cutthroat, highly discreet commercial real estate attorney up in Columbus, an hour away, so there would be absolutely no local gossip that could somehow filter back to Claire or her colleagues. I paid him a premium for absolute silence. I formed a holding company, a limited liability company called Rust Belt Holdings. I used my father's money to buy the Oakwood building outright in cash through the LLC. No mortgage, no bank notes, no monthly interest. I am the sole managing member and 100% owner of the company, but my name is nowhere on the public-facing county property documents. My attorney acts as the registered statutory agent, providing a complete, impenetrable shield of anonymity. Once the ink was dry, the title was clear, and the heavy brass keys were sitting in my lawyer's hands, I had him directly contact Claire's commercial broker. He spun a brilliant, believable story. He told her broker that a private investment group out of Columbus had recently acquired a turnkey medical property in Oakwood and, as part of a community development initiative to bring fresh medical talent to the area, was willing to offer a very favorable, heavily below-market multi-year lease to a promising new local physician. Claire was absolutely ecstatic. She came home that night glowing, talking a mile a minute, her eyes wide with excitement. She talked about how the universe was finally rewarding her hard work, about how she had out-negotiated the local market, and how her broker couldn't believe her incredible luck. She signed a 5-year commercial triple-net lease in February of 2025. She thought she was renting from a faceless, wealthy corporate entity that believed in her potential. She was actually renting from her husband. My plan was to walk into her clinic on our upcoming 10th wedding anniversary, hand her the actual deed to the LLC in a nice leather folder, and tell her she owned the building free and clear. That was the master plan. I used to fall asleep on nights when my back was aching so badly I could barely breathe, imagining the look of pure, unadulterated joy on her face when I handed her that piece of paper. I thought it would be the crowning achievement of our marriage, the moment all the suffering paid off. The clinic was scheduled to officially open its doors to the public on the 14th of April. On the 8th of April, a Tuesday, I was at the shop. We had a massive, mud-caked Freightliner up on the heavy-duty hydraulic lift, and I was positioning a 250-pound transmission jack under the undercarriage to drop the heavy gearbox. The safety catch on the jack had been ground down and structurally compromised by a careless rookie on the night shift who didn't bother to report it, but I didn't know that. I was laying flat on the rolling creeper, guiding the heavy steel saddle into place, my arms fully extended. The catch slipped. The heavy steel jack handle whipped around with thousands of pounds of hydraulic pressure behind it and caught me dead in the right side of my chest. It felt like being kicked by a Clydesdale. I heard the wet, sickening crack of bone before my brain even registered the devastating impact. 3 fractured ribs, instantly shattered, right there on the greasy concrete shop floor. I couldn't breathe. The air was violently expelled from my lungs, and the world narrowed down to a terrifying pinpoint of gray, fuzzy light. My crew chief, a guy named Mac who had been turning wrenches with me for a decade, found me gasping on the floor, clutching my chest. He screamed for someone to call 911. The ambulance took me to Miami Valley Hospital with lights and sirens blaring, every single bump in the road sending white-hot agony shooting through my torso. They wheeled me into the trauma bay, cut my grease-stained work shirt off my chest, wrapped me up in a heavy, restrictive compression binder, took a dozen x-rays, and gave me 4 drip of heavy, highly addictive narcotics that make you feel like your head is packed with wet cotton. The attending ER physician, a guy about my age, looked me in the eye with dead seriousness and gave me strict, non-negotiable orders not to lift anything heavier than a cup of coffee for at least 6 weeks. A punctured lung had been a millimeter away, he told me. I was lucky to be breathing. Claire came to pick me up at the emergency room 2 hours later. She was irritated. I want to be incredibly exact about that emotion because it matters more than anything else in this story. She was not panicked. She was not crying. She did not rush over to my bedside to check my bandages, hold my hand, or kiss my forehead and tell me it was going to be okay. She walked into the ER waiting room visibly annoyed, checking her Apple Watch. She was irritated because she was supposed to be interviewing a potential front desk receptionist that afternoon, and my catastrophic accident had completely derailed her tightly managed schedule. She drove me home in complete, heavy silence, tapping her manicured nails impatiently on the steering wheel at every red light. She helped me out of the car, walked me into the house, eased me onto the couch in the living room with a heavy, dramatic sigh that conveyed exactly how much of a burden I was being, and put a single glass of tap water on the coffee table. She told me to rest, and then she immediately walked away, retreating into the kitchen to make her phone calls and salvage her afternoon schedule. Our house is a cheap, mass-produced ranch-style build from the 1970s. I had always meant to remodel it, to put in proper insulation and better drywall, but the clinic took financial priority every single year. The wall between the living room and the kitchen is just thin, half-inch drywall and hollow 2x4s. It is absolutely not insulated for sound. You can hear a spoon drop on the linoleum in the kitchen while sitting perfectly still on the couch. I was lying there in a haze of mind-numbing pain, the narcotics fighting a losing battle against the shattered bone in my chest, trying to figure out how to take a shallow breath without a sharp, stabbing agony radiating through my chest cavity, when I heard her cell phone ring. She answered it immediately, picking it up on the first ring. I could tell from her tone it was her mother, Helen. Helen never liked me. Helen was a deeply superficial, status-obsessed woman who thought her highly educated daughter was destined to marry a neurosurgeon, a corporate lawyer, or a hedge fund manager with a summer home, not a man who wears scuffed steel-toed boots to work and has permanent calluses on his palms. Over the years, I had learned to bite my tongue and ignore Helen's passive-aggressive comments about my clothes, the beat-up truck I drove, and my lack of a 4-year college degree. During Thanksgiving dinners, Helen would talk completely over me, directly addressing Claire about people of our caliber and our kind of society. I took it, for 7 long years, swallowing my pride because I loved her daughter and I thought we were an unbreakable team. I heard Claire sigh heavily in the kitchen, the kind of deeply exasperated sigh you reserve for a massive, day-ruining inconvenience. And then I heard my wife of 7 years say the words that systematically dismantled my entire life, sentence by sentence, pulling the rug out from under everything I thought I knew. I know, Mom. It's an absolute disaster. It's the worst possible timing. He's going to be laid up on the couch groaning for a month, right when I need to be networking and hosting the grand opening. I'm going to have to do everything myself. He can't even carry a box of gauze or help set up the folding chairs. He's totally useless right now. There was a long pause while her mother spoke on the other end, her voice a muted, rapid buzzing through the thin drywall. Then Claire laughed. It was a cold, tired, deeply calculated laugh. It wasn't a laugh of stress or temporary frustration. It was a laugh of deep, fundamental agreement. No, I haven't told him yet. I can't do it right this second with him all bandaged up and high on painkillers. He'll just make a massive scene, and I don't have the emotional bandwidth to deal with his blue-collar pride right now. But yes, I spoke to the lawyer yesterday morning. I've been planning this since my 3rd year of residency, Mom. I just needed everything to line up. I need to file the divorce papers before the clinic officially opens its doors and starts generating revenue. The lawyer said if I wait even a few weeks, the practice officially becomes a marital asset, its valuation goes up, and he'll be legally entitled to half of it in the settlement. If I file right now, today, it's just a business on paper with a bunch of debt, and I walk away clean. Another pause. I stopped breathing entirely. The blinding pain in my fractured ribs disappeared, completely overridden and replaced by a cold, echoing vacuum in the dead center of my chest. It felt like the floor of the house had simply dropped away into a black, endless abyss. I had funded her life, and she had been plotting her exit since residency. Mom, look at it logically, Claire said, her voice dropping a little lower, but not nearly low enough to stop it from traveling straight through the cheap drywall I had painted 3 different times just to make her happy. He was a stepping stone. I appreciate what he did, I really do, but we are completely different people now. We are in different stratospheres. I'm a doctor. I'm going to be moving in different circles. I have a professional reputation to build in Oakwood. Dr. Evans from the country club board is coming to my ribbon cutting. I can't exactly bring a grease monkey to the galas or medical board dinners. People will look at him, they'll hear him talk about spark plugs, and then they'll look at me and judge me. We have absolutely nothing in common anymore. He served his purpose. It sounds harsh, I know, but it's just the truth. I have to look out for my future. I outgrew him years ago. He served his purpose. That is a phrase a person uses when talking about a temporary kitchen appliance, a rented moving van, or a cheap umbrella you throw away after a violent storm. It is not how a human being talks about a husband who traded the absolute best physical years of his life, his health, and his youth to keep them warm, fed, and educated. I lay perfectly still on that couch and I stared at a jagged, familiar crack in the ceiling plaster. I did not yell. I did not struggle to my feet, storm into the kitchen, and confront her. I didn't throw my water glass at the wall to make a dramatic point. When you spend your entire adult life diagnosing catastrophic mechanical failures in massive, complex machines, you learn a fundamental truth about how the world works. Screaming at a broken engine does not fix the engine. Crying over a blown head gasket does not replace the gasket. Kicking a flat tire doesn't put air back in it. You have to step back, detach your emotions entirely, look at the intricate schematics, and dismantle the problem methodically, piece by piece. I had just been handed the complete, transparent schematic of my marriage, and I saw exactly where the rot was. It wasn't a crack that could be patched with an apology or counseling. The entire foundation was built on sand, manipulation, and lies. She came back into the living room 10 minutes later, her phone tucked casually into the pocket of her designer scrubs. She looked down at me, asked casually if I needed another pain pill, and smiled. It was a perfect, practiced, deeply clinical smile. It was the exact smile she used on difficult, complaining patients to pacify them while mentally moving on to the next chart. I looked up at the woman I had broken my back for, the woman whose towering tuition I had paid with thousands of hours in sub-zero winters, the woman who had just coldly referred to me as a stepping stone, and I looked right into her eyes. "No, honey," I said, my voice perfectly steady, revealing absolutely nothing of the storm raging inside my head. "I'm perfectly fine." The grand opening of her highly anticipated Oakwood clinic was exactly 6 days away. She had a massive ribbon-cutting ceremony scheduled for Monday morning with the local Chamber of Commerce, a representative from the mayor's office, and a photographer from the local Dayton paper. She had spent $2,000 on an overpriced caterer and floral arrangements for the event just to impress people like Dr. Evans. I spent those 6 days sitting in a worn-out recliner in the corner of the living room, managing my severe physical pain with over-the-counter Tylenol because I needed my head entirely clear of narcotics. I could not afford to be foggy. I operated my cell phone with my left hand while she was out at the clinic preparing for her big debut. Over those 6 days, I made 3 very specific, highly calculated phone calls. On day 2, the first call was to my real estate attorney up in Columbus. I asked him to pull the master lease agreement for the Oakwood property and review it with me line by line over the phone. Commercial leases are not like residential leases. They do not have the same warm, fuzzy, forgiving tenant protections that keep benevolent landlords from kicking people out of their apartments when they fall on hard times. A commercial triple net lease is a ruthless, ironclad, deeply unsympathetic document designed specifically to protect the landlord's financial interests and property value at all absolute costs. And my lawyer was very, very good at his job. He had written a very tight, unforgiving document. There was a standard, robust clause in Section 14 regarding default, breach of contract, and landlord remedies. More importantly, there was a highly specific, customized rider we had attached because Claire's business was a brand new startup with absolutely no historical revenue or proven patient base. The rider explicitly stated that the landlord offered a heavily discounted base rent for the first 12 months, but that discount was entirely contingent on the tenant maintaining strict financial stability, good public standing, and full disclosures of any material changes in personal circumstances that could affect business operations. If the landlord, in its sole, unquestionable, and unilateral discretion, deemed the tenant's financial standing, personal liabilities, or operational capacity insecure at any point prior to the commencement date of operations, the landlord reserved the absolute legal right to either demand an impossible 6-month security deposit in cash within 24 hours or terminate the lease entirely with a 72-hour notice to vacate the premises. I told my lawyer exactly what I had heard. I told him to draft the termination notice, make it completely airtight so no judge in the state of Ohio would touch it, and overnight it to my house via FedEx. On day 3, the second call was to a ruthless, highly feared divorce attorney in Dayton named Vance. A buddy of mine had used Vance after his own brutal split a few years back and said the man was a shark. I didn't go into his office and give him a sob story. I didn't ask for a shoulder to cry on or seek emotional validation. I gave him the hard, cold numbers. I gave him the dates of our marriage, the exact dates of her graduation, and the timeline. I told him about the Oakwood Clinic, the LLC, my father's inheritance, and her exact, verbatim stated strategy for filing against me before the clinic opened. Vance listened quietly, did some quick math on his legal pad, and advised me that since she had not actually seen a single paying patient yet, valuing the practice for a standard marital split would be incredibly difficult and likely result in me getting very little of the actual business itself. However, he pointed out something she hadn't considered. Because I had single-handedly funded her entire undergraduate payoff and medical education, while she contributed zero income to the household for 7 consecutive years, I had a massive, undeniable legal claim for permanent alimony and equitable reimbursement under Ohio law. I could bleed her future income for decades. I stopped him right there. I told him I did not want a single red cent of her future money. I did not want to be tied to this woman for the next 20 years through monthly alimony checks that would just serve as a constant reminder of my own foolishness. I wanted to serve her first. I wanted to dictate the complete terms of the total dissolution of our assets, and I wanted the paperwork drawn up immediately so I could hand-deliver it. Vance smiled through the phone and said he would have it ready in 24 hours. On day 4, the third call was to my boss, Mac, at the Fleet Center. I had worked for the man for 15 years. I had pulled his bacon out of the fire more times than I could count. I told him I was taking an immediate, early retirement. I had enough money left from my father's life insurance to live on comfortably for the rest of my life if I was smart with my investments, and I was absolutely, fundamentally done breaking my physical body for a future that did not exist. He was shocked. He offered me a comfortable desk job in dispatch with a pay bump, but he heard the dead, hollow tone in my voice, and he didn't argue. He just thanked me for my years of service and wished me luck. Days 5 and 6 were a masterclass in acting. I watched her get dressed in the mornings, smiling at me, telling me she wished I could come to the opening, but that I needed my rest. I watched her pack her briefcase. I watched the sheer hypocrisy of a woman who was preparing to stab me in the back while asking me if I wanted her to bring home takeout for dinner. I just nodded and smiled back. Sunday afternoon arrived, the day before her highly publicized grand opening. Claire was at the clinic, frantically setting up the final promotional displays, arranging the waiting room magazines just right, and preparing the back room for the caterer who was dropping off expensive pastries and artisan coffee the next morning. I grabbed my truck keys off the kitchen counter. It took me 4 agonizing, breath-stealing minutes just to get out of the cab in the Oakwood parking lot because my ribs were burning with every slight movement, but I pushed through the pain. I walked up to the building and pushed through the heavy glass front doors. The place looked incredible. It really, truly did. She had exquisite taste. She had chosen dark, rich hardwood floors, soft ambient recessed lighting, and high-end modern leather furniture for the waiting area. In the back, through the open doors, I could see the expensive medical equipment, the examination tables, the digital monitors, the sleek sterilization units. All of it financed through a massive, high-interest commercial bank loan she had only been able to secure because the bank saw the incredibly favorable, long-term lease terms my LLC had quietly granted her. She was standing behind the pristine granite reception desk, sorting through patient intake clipboards, dressed in a sharp designer blouse. When the door chimed, she looked up. Her expression shifted instantly from professional anticipation to profound, unfiltered annoyance. "Thomas, what on earth are you doing here?" she snapped, stepping out from behind the desk, putting her hands on her hips. "You're supposed to be at home resting. The ER doctor explicitly said you shouldn't be driving. You're going to ruin your recovery, and I absolutely do not have the time to take you back to the hospital today if you mess up your ribs again." "I needed to deliver something in person," I said. I walked slowly, deliberately across the hardwood floor and placed a thick, heavy manila envelope flat on the polished granite counter between us. "What is this?" she asked, eyeing it suspiciously, making no move to touch it, as if it were covered in grease from the shop and might stain her blouse. "It's two things," I said, keeping my voice entirely level, completely devoid of any anger, sorrow, or malice. "The first document is a legal petition for the complete dissolution of our marriage. You are officially served. The second document is a formal notice of lease termination from Rust Belt Holdings LLC. You have exactly 72 hours to vacate the premises entirely." She stared at the envelope like a live rattlesnake had just been placed on her desk. She didn't blink. Then she looked up at my face, and I watched the exact, precise moment her highly educated, calculating brain tried to process the conflicting information and completely short-circuited. "What are you talking about? Divorce? Thomas, this isn't funny. Have you been taking too many of those painkillers?" She let out a nervous, breathy laugh, looking around the empty clinic as if looking for a hidden camera or waiting for a punchline. "And what do you mean lease termination? You don't have anything to do with my landlord. My landlord is an investment group in Columbus. You're a mechanic. You don't even know what an LLC is." "Rust Belt Holdings is an LLC registered in Delaware, operated out of a law office in Columbus," I said, reciting the cold, hard facts exactly the same way I would recite the torque specifications on a blown cylinder head. "The sole managing member and 100% owner of that LLC is Thomas Hannon. Me. I bought this brick building with the inheritance money my father left me when he died last November. I was going to give you the deed to this property, free and clear, for our 10th wedding anniversary. I had a whole speech planned out for that day. But I guess a grease monkey shouldn't be making complex real estate decisions for a doctor who is moving in different circles." The color drained out of her face so fast, it was like watching a horrific magic trick. Her skin didn't just go pale, it went the color of wet, curing concrete. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She gripped the edge of the granite counter so hard her knuckles turned stark white. Her knees physically buckled a fraction of an inch. "You were on the phone with your mother on Tuesday afternoon," I continued, the words dropping like heavy lead stones in the quiet, sterile clinic. I heard every single word through the living room wall. "You called me a stepping stone. You laughed with her about it. You said you needed to file the divorce papers before this clinic officially opened its doors to protect your assets from me. So, I sat on the couch, I did the math, and I saved you the court filing fee. But you don't have a clinic to protect anymore, Claire. What you have is a massive, unsecured commercial bank loan for hundreds of thousands of dollars of medical equipment that currently sits inside a building you no longer have the legal right to occupy." "You can't do this," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, terrified. Her hands started shaking violently as she finally reached out and pulled the heavy documents out of the envelope. Her eyes darted frantically over the dense legal jargon, looking for a loophole. "I have a signed lease. I have a binding contract. I have legal rights as a commercial tenant. You can't just throw me out on the street." "It's a commercial triple net lease." I corrected her gently, almost clinically, mirroring the exact tone she used when diagnosing a patient. "Read Section 14, Clause B, the startup rider on page 9. The landlord has formally determined that your impending, highly messy divorce renders your personal financial stability incredibly insecure. You are a massive liability to this property. The lease is voided, effective immediately. If you want to fight it, you are more than welcome to hire a lawyer and take Rust Belt Holdings to civil court. But you will have to explain to the local judge, the bank that holds your massive equipment loan, and the Ohio State Medical Board exactly why your brand new medical practice is embroiled in a hostile commercial eviction on day one of operations. It will be public record by Tuesday. She dropped the papers onto the floor. She started crying. But I had spent 7 years living with this woman, and I knew her tears. I knew exactly what they meant. It was not the crying of a heartbroken, devastated wife mourning the tragic end of her marriage or the loss of her life partner. It was the desperate, panicked, hyperventilating crying of a highly ambitious person who has spent years meticulously building a towering house of cards, only to watch someone calmly open a window and let the hurricane in. She begged me. She came rushing around the counter and tried to grab my arm, but I stepped back quickly, wincing sharply at the pain in my ribs. She told me she didn't mean any of it, that her mother had pressured her into saying those horrible things, that the crushing, overwhelming stress of the opening had made her crazy and she was just venting to blow off steam. She offered to go to intensive marriage counseling immediately, to pay for it herself. She offered to put my name on the practice as a managing partner, giving me half the revenue. She brought up our past. She brought up the time I fixed her cobalt. She tried to use every single emotional lever she had left. She offered me everything she thought a grease monkey wanted to hear to be pacified. I looked around the beautiful, clean, silent clinic. It smelled like expensive antiseptic, fresh premium paint, and new leather furniture. It smelled absolutely nothing like me. There was no room for me in this building, just like there was absolutely no room for me in the life she had planned for herself once she had successfully extracted everything she needed from my bank account and my spine. The ribbon cutting is tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I said, carefully zipping up my jacket to protect my chest from the April wind outside. I highly suggest you call the mayor's office, Dr. Evans, the Chamber of Commerce, and your caterer right now and tell them there's been an unforeseen logistical delay. You have until Wednesday at 5 p.m. sharp to get your medical equipment out of my building, or I will have the county sheriff change the locks, impound every single monitor and exam table in here, and sell it at public auction to recoup my legal fees. I turned around and walked out the heavy glass doors. Every step I took sent a blinding, suffocating jolt of pain through my broken ribs, a sharp physical reminder of the brutal toll my life had taken to get her into that room, but I kept my back entirely straight. I did not limp, I did not falter, and I did not look back until I was safely back inside the cab of my truck, completely out of her sight. The divorce took 9 grueling, incredibly ugly months. She fought aggressively at first. She hired a shark of a lawyer of her own, a guy who tried every dirty trick in the book. They tried desperately to claim a portion of the LLC or force the sale of the Oakwood building to split the proceeds, claiming it was marital property because we were married when the LLC was formed. But Vance was significantly better, and the law was entirely on my side. He easily proved through a mountain of bank statements, probate records, and tracking numbers that the LLC was funded entirely by inherited, non-mingled assets long prior to any legal separation, making it 100% separate property under strict Ohio law. The judge threw her claims out with prejudice. She couldn't touch a single dime of my father's money. Meanwhile, because she had no physical location to operate out of and the commercial eviction on her public record terrified every other commercial landlord in a 50-mile radius, she immediately defaulted on her massive equipment loans. I actually drove past the clinic a week later and saw the repo trucks loading her pristine exam tables into the back of a box truck. Commercial medical equipment depreciates the absolute second it comes out of the shipping box. The bank sold it at a massive loss at auction, leaving her owing tens of thousands of dollars in the difference, with absolutely no physical asset to show for it. Her credit was completely destroyed. To avoid total bankruptcy, Dr. Claire Hannon had to swallow her immense pride and take a job as a standard staff physician at a walk-in urgent care clinic in a rundown, depressing strip mall in Kettering just to cover her mounting debts and legal fees. There are no galas for urgent care doctors. There are no country club dinners or medical board speaking engagements. She works 12-hour shifts treating stubborn sinus infections, writing generic notes for high school kids trying to miss gym class, arguing with anti-vaxxers, and wrapping sprained ankles for walk-ins. She is making a mere fraction of what she expected to earn in private practice, and the ultimate irony is that she reports directly to a medical director who is 5 years younger than she is and treats her like a junior resident. I sold the Oakwood building 6 months after the divorce was finally finalized for $460,000 to a regional dental franchise. I took that money, combined it with the rest of my savings and the remainder of my father's life insurance, and I left Dayton for good. I bought a beautiful, heavily wooded piece of property down in the Hocking Hills, far away from the city. It is incredibly quiet out here. The air smells like pine trees, damp earth, and wood smoke from my stone chimney. I built a small, well-equipped mechanical shop on the back of the property for myself. I don't work 80 hours a week anymore. Sometimes, local farmers bring me their old diesel tractors or heavy farm machinery to work on. I charge them fairly, I take my time, and I actually enjoy the work again without the crushing pressure of someone else's ambition riding on my shoulders. My ribs healed, mostly, though they still ache with a dull, persistent throb when the Ohio weather turns freezing cold and the snow starts to fall. A man can give absolutely everything he has to build someone else up. You can hand over your time, your physical health, your fleeting youth, and your hard-earned money, and you can easily convince yourself that it is a noble investment in a shared future. You can look at the person across the kitchen table and believe that you are building an empire together. But if the very foundation of that future is built on contempt, secrecy, and a fundamental, arrogant lack of respect, it does not matter how beautiful the house looks from the outside. It will inevitably fall, and it will violently crush whoever is standing underneath it. I was a mechanic for 25 years, and the one thing I know for absolute, undeniable certain is that you cannot fix a machine that is fundamentally designed to break you. You just have to wash the grease off your hands, walk away without looking back, and let it rust.